Reba Mcentire calls out, fan with a custom dog looking just like her, and what they do together moves America. The rain hammered against the windows of the small Nashville apartment like bullets against glass, each drop echoing the hollow emptiness that had consumed Daniel Harmon's life for the past 2 years. At 35, he should have been in the prime of his life, but instead he sat motionless on his worn leather couch, staring at the framed photograph of his late wife Sarah, her radiant smile frozen in time, mocking the darkness that now filled every corner of his existence. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle whimpering of Little Red, his 3-year-old mixed-breed dog, who seemed to sense his master's pain with an almost supernatural intuition. Daniel's calloused fingers traced the edges of Sarah's photograph, remembering how she used to fill their tiny apartment with laughter and the sweet aroma of her homemade apple pie. She had been his everything, his wife, his best friend, his reason for waking up each morning. Cancer had stolen her away in a matter of months, leaving Daniel feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. The music classroom where he taught high school students felt more like a prison now, each day blending into the next in a haze of grief and regret. Little Red padded across the hardwood floor, his small paws making soft clicking sounds as he approached Daniel. The dog's amber eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed almost human, as if he knew that his master was drowning in sorrow. Daniel reached down and scooped up the 20-pound bundle of fur, holding him close to his chest like a lifeline. "What are we gonna do, buddy?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." It was in moments like these that Daniel found himself reaching for his old guitar, the one Sarah had bought him for their second wedding anniversary. His fingers would find the familiar chords almost automatically, and without fail he would end up playing the same song, "The Greatest Man I Never Knew" by Reba Mcentire. Sarah had always teased him about his obsession with the country music legend, but she understood that Reba's voice had been his companion through every major moment of his life. From his teenage years when his father abandoned the family to the night he proposed to Sarah, Reba's music had been the soundtrack to his journey. Now, as he strummed the opening chords, Little Red settled into his lap with a contented sigh. Daniel's voice, though rough with disuse and emotion, carried the melody with a heartbreak that would have moved even the strongest soul to tears. "The greatest man I never knew lived just down the hall," he sang, his voice growing stronger with each line. It was during these musical moments that he felt closest to Sarah, as if her spirit was somehow present in the room, listening to him pour his heart out through Reba's words. As the song ended, Daniel looked down at Little Red and had a thought that would have seemed absurd to anyone else, but made perfect sense to a man grappling with overwhelming grief. "You know what, buddy? Sarah always said you had her beautiful red hair." He studied the dog's russet-colored coat, noting how it caught the lamplight in waves of copper and gold. Maybe we could try something different, something that might make us both feel a little less alone. Before you continue reading this incredible story of hope and unexpected miracles, we'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what you think will happen next. Where are you watching from? Your support means everything to us as we share these heartwarming tales that remind us all of the power of music and love. Daniel had always been handy with grooming Little Red. It was one of the few skills he'd developed out of necessity after Sarah's medical bills had drained their savings. What started as a way to save money on professional grooming had become a therapeutic ritual, one of the few activities that could distract him from his grief, even if only temporarily. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had a vision that seemed to spring from some deep well of creativity he didn't know still existed within him. Working with the precision of an artist, Daniel began to carefully trim and style Little Red's fur. He sectioned the hair on top of the dog's head, creating volume and height that defied gravity. Using a small amount of hair gel that Sarah had left behind, he teased and shaped the fur until it resembled the iconic hairstyle that had made Reba Mcentire a household name in the 80s and 90s. Little Red sat patiently through the entire process, as if he understood the importance of this strange new ritual. When Daniel stepped back to admire his handiwork, he couldn't help but laugh for the first time in months. Little Red looked absolutely ridiculous and absolutely perfect at the same time. The dog's natural russet coat, now styled into a voluminous bouffant, bore an uncanny resemblance to Reba's signature red hair. But Daniel wasn't finished yet. Rummaging through Sarah's old craft supplies, he found scraps of red fabric and spent the next 2 hours hand-sewing a miniature version of the sequined dress Reba had worn in her fancy music video. "Well, I'll be damned," Daniel whispered, holding Little Red up to the mirror. "You look more like Reba than Reba herself." The dog seemed to preen under the attention, his tail wagging with an enthusiasm that Daniel hadn't seen in months. For the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel felt something other than crushing despair. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something resembling hope, a tiny spark of joy that he thought had been extinguished forever. From that night forward, transforming Little Red into a canine version of Reba Mcentire became Daniel's obsession. He spent hours researching Reba's most iconic looks, from her early career with the big hair and rhinestone cowboy boots to her more recent elegant gowns. He taught himself to sew, creating an entire wardrobe of miniature costumes that perfectly captured the essence of the country music queen. Little Red seemed to love the attention and the transformation, striking poses that would have made a professional model jealous. The ritual became their evening routine. After Daniel finished teaching his high school music classes, fighting through another day of barely contained sorrow, he would come home to Little Red and spend hours working on new outfits, new hairstyles, new ways to honor the woman whose music had carried him through the darkest periods of his life. Sarah's sewing machine, which had sat unused since her death, hummed back to life as Daniel created increasingly elaborate costumes, a miniature version of Reba's CMA Awards gown. A tiny replica of her Does He Love You performance outfit, even a scaled-down version of her Broadway costume from Annie Get Your Gun. Daniel's sister Emma had been worried sick about him since Sarah's death. Her weekly visits had become exercises in frustration as she watched her once vibrant brother waste away in his grief. But when she arrived one Thursday evening and found Daniel laughing as he tried to teach Little Red to perform while wearing a miniature sequined jumpsuit, she knew something had shifted. The spark wasn't fully back, but it was there, flickering like a candle in a gentle breeze. "Danny, this is—" Emma started, then stopped, watching as Little Red actually seemed to pose for the camera she'd pulled out. "This is incredible, and slightly insane, but mostly incredible." She snapped photo after photo, marveling at how the little dog seemed to understand his role as a canine tribute artist. "You know what? I'm putting these on social media. The world needs to see this." No," Daniel protested, but his heart wasn't in it. "I don't do social media anymore, you know that." He'd deleted all his accounts after Sarah's death, unable to bear the constant reminders of their life together, the sympathy messages that felt like salt in an open wound. "I'm not posting them on your accounts, I'm posting them on mine," Emma said, already uploading the photos to her Instagram account. "Trust me on this one, Danny. Sometimes the world gives us exactly what we need when we need it most." She added the hashtag Chachu Rebus Dog Double without really thinking about it, just wanting to share her brother's incredible artistry with her few hundred followers. Neither Daniel nor Emma could have predicted what happened next. The photos exploded across social media platforms like wildfire, shared and reshared thousands of times within hours. Comments poured in from around the world, praising Daniel's creativity and Little Red's uncanny resemblance to the country music icon. Local news stations picked up the story, and before long entertainment blogs were writing articles about the mysterious Reba dog and the unknown artist behind the viral sensation. But Daniel remained blissfully unaware of the growing fame surrounding Little Red. He'd kept his distance from the internet, from news, from anything that might remind him of the connected world he'd once been part of with Sarah. All he knew was that his evening ritual with Little Red had become the highlight of his days, the one thing that made him feel creative and purposeful again. What Daniel didn't know was that his tribute to Reba Mcentire was about to change not just his life, but the lives of thousands of people who would soon witness one of the most heartwarming moments in country music history. In just a few weeks, his quiet world of grief and healing would collide with the very woman who had unknowingly been his lifeline through the darkest period of his existence. As Daniel tucked Little Red into his small bed that night, the dog still wearing a miniature version of Reba's iconic red dress. He whispered a prayer he hadn't said since Sarah's funeral. "If you're up there, baby, I hope you're laughing at us. I hope you know we're trying to find our way back to the light." Little Red's tail thumped against the blanket once, as if he was delivering Sarah's response, and for just a moment, Daniel's apartment didn't feel quite so empty. Three weeks had passed since Emma's impulsive decision to share the photos of Little Red, and the viral sensation had taken on a life of its own. While Daniel remained in his self-imposed digital exile, completely unaware that his therapeutic hobby had captured the hearts of millions, the rest of the world was falling in love with the little dog who looked remarkably like country music royalty. Emma watched the numbers climb on her social media accounts with a mixture of excitement and concern. The photos had been shared over 50,000 times, and she was receiving messages from entertainment reporters, talent agents, and even representatives from major television networks. But it wasn't just the general public who had taken notice. In her sprawling mansion just outside Nashville, Reba Mcentire herself was scrolling through her phone after a long day of recording sessions when her assistant Marcus burst into her home office with an energy that could only mean one thing: he'd discovered something extraordinary. "Reba, you have got to see this," Marcus said, practically bouncing on his feet as he handed her his tablet. "Remember how we were just talking about how social media never shows us anything genuinely heartwarming anymore? Well, prepare to have your mind blown." Reba adjusted her reading glasses and looked at the screen, expecting to see another tribute video or fan art. What she saw instead made her heart skip a beat. There, staring back at her from the small screen, was what appeared to be a miniature version of herself, complete with her signature red hair, perfectly styled, and wearing a sequined dress that was an exact replica of one she'd worn during her fancy era. "Is that—" she started, then laughed out loud, a genuine belly laugh that she hadn't experienced in weeks. "Is that a dog, dressed up like me?" "Not just dressed up," Marcus said, swiping to show her more photos. "Look at this craftsmanship. This isn't some cheap costume from a pet store. Someone handmade every single piece of this outfit. And look at the hair. That's not a wig. That's actually styled and colored to match yours perfectly." Reba studied each image with growing amazement. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Little Red wasn't just wearing a costume, he was embodying her entire aesthetic with an accuracy that spoke to genuine artistry and deep admiration. The dog's poses were natural, his expression somehow capturing the confidence and sass that had defined her stage presence for decades. "Do we know who's behind this?" Reba asked, unable to stop staring at the images. Something about the tribute touched her more deeply than the usual fan art or impersonations she encountered. This felt different, more personal, more heartfelt. "That's where it gets interesting," Marcus replied, pulling up Emma's Instagram profile. The photos were posted by this woman named Emma Harmon, but according to the comments, she's not the artist. Her brother Daniel created everything, but he doesn't have any social media presence. No Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, nothing. It's like he doesn't exist online. Reba's curiosity was piqued. In an age where everyone documented every moment of their lives online, someone who remained completely off the grid was unusual. What else do we know about this Daniel? That's just it. We don't know anything. Emma hasn't responded to any of the interview requests or messages asking about her brother. It's like they're intentionally staying hidden, which makes this whole thing even more intriguing. Over the next several days, Reba found herself returning to the photos again and again. There was something about the tribute that felt different from the typical fan homages she received. The costumes weren't just accurate, they were created with a level of love and attention that spoke to something deeper than casual fandom. She began to wonder about Daniel, this mysterious brother who could create such beautiful work but chose to remain invisible in the digital age. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his daily routine, blissfully unaware that his evenings with Little Red had become a global phenomenon. His days at Jefferson High School had become slightly more bearable, though he still struggled with the weight of his grief. His students had begun to notice small changes in him. He smiled more often, seemed less lost in his own thoughts, and had even started incorporating some new energy into his music lessons. "Mr. Harmon, you seem different lately," said Jessica, one of his more perceptive seniors, after a particularly engaging lesson about country music history. "Like, in a good way." "More like yourself." Daniel paused at the piano, surprised by her observation. "What do you mean, Jessica?" "I don't know exactly," she said, gathering her sheet music. "You just seem less sad, I guess. Like, maybe you're finding your way back to the music again." Her words stayed with him throughout the day. That evening, as he worked on a new outfit for Little Red, a replica of Reba's CMA Entertainer of the Year acceptance dress, he realized that Jessica was right. The grief was still there, still heavy and overwhelming at times, but it wasn't consuming every moment of his existence anymore. Little Red's transformation had become more than just a tribute to his musical idol. It had become a pathway back to creativity, to purpose, to something resembling hope. It was Emma who finally broke the news to him about the viral sensation, though she approached the subject with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb. She'd been wrestling with whether to tell him for weeks, knowing how fragile his emotional state remained and how violently he'd reacted to any mention of social media since Sarah's death. "Danny, I need to tell you something," she said on one of her regular Thursday visits, finding him putting the finishing touches on Little Red's latest ensemble. "Remember those photos I took of Little Red a few weeks ago? The ones you threatened to put online?" Daniel asked, not looking up from his needlework. "Please tell me you didn't actually do that." Emma took a deep breath. "I did. And Danny, you need to know what happened because of it." The color drained from Daniel's face. "Em, you promised me. You promised you wouldn't put me back out there. I can't handle people knowing about us, about Sarah, about any of it." "It's not about you," Emma said quickly. "I mean, it is, but it's not. People don't know your story. They just know about Little Red and how incredible these costumes are. Danny, the photos have been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Entertainment news shows are talking about it. And—" She paused, knowing this next part might overwhelm him completely. "Reba's people have been trying to find you." Daniel's hands stopped moving entirely. The needle he'd been using to attach sequins to Little Red's latest dress remained suspended in mid-air. "What did you just say?" "Reba Mcentire herself has seen the photos. Her assistant has been reaching out through my social media accounts, trying to get in touch with you. Danny, she wants to meet you and Little Red." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Little Red, sensing the shift in energy, padded over and placed his paw on Daniel's knee, looking up at him with those knowing amber eyes. Finally, Daniel set down his sewing and picked up the dog, holding him close to his chest. "This isn't real," he whispered. "Things like this don't happen to people like me." "But it is real," Emma insisted, pulling out her phone to show him the official messages from Reba's verified social media accounts. Look, here's the screenshot of her post where she shared your photos. She wrote, "I am absolutely blown away by this incredible tribute. The artistry and love that went into these costumes is beyond anything I've ever seen. I would love to meet the talented person behind this beautiful work. Danny, she's been looking for you for 2 weeks." Daniel stared at the phone screen, his hands trembling slightly. There was Reba Mcentire, the woman whose voice had carried him through his father's abandonment, his wedding day, and the darkest nights after Sarah's death, sharing photos of his work with her millions of followers. The reality of it felt too enormous to process. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know exactly. Her assistant just said she'd love to meet you and talk about your incredible talent. Danny, this could change everything for you." "I don't want everything to change," Daniel said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. For the first time in 2 years, he felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement rather than dread about the future. I can't handle disappointment right now, Em. I can't handle hoping for something and having it fall apart." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then don't hope for anything specific. Just..." Maybe consider that sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need when we're finally ready to receive it. That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling while Little Red slept peacefully beside him in his tiny Reba-inspired pajamas. The thought that his idol, the woman whose music had been his constant companion through every major life event, knew he existed, felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Part of him wanted to ignore Emma's revelation, to continue living in his safe bubble of grief and routine, but another part, a part that had been dormant since Sarah's death, was beginning to stir with possibility. As dawn broke over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded him of better days, Daniel made a decision that would change his life forever. He was going to take his savings, buy tickets to Reba's upcoming concert at the Grand Ole Opry, and take Little Red to see the woman who had unknowingly saved his life through her music. He didn't dare hope for anything more than a glimpse of his hero from the cheap seats, but something deep in his heart told him that this was a step he needed to take. What Daniel couldn't have imagined was that Reba Mcentire had been having the exact same thought, wondering if the mysterious man behind the incredible tribute would show up at her next Nashville show, and secretly hoping that fate would bring them together in the most magical way possible. The morning of Reba's concert at the Grand Ole Opry arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made Nashville feel alive with possibility. Daniel stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his only suit, the same charcoal grey one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, and fighting waves of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm him. His hands shook as he knotted his tie, the same nervous energy he'd felt on his wedding day, now mixed with a grief-tinged excitement that felt almost guilty. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked Little Red, who sat patiently on the bed wearing his most elaborate creation yet, a miniature version of the iconic red dress Reba had worn during her Fancy performance at the 1991 CMA Awards. The tiny dog looked absolutely regal, his carefully styled red fur catching the morning light like spun copper. "Think we're crazy for doing this?" Little Red tilted his head and wagged his tail, and Daniel took that as approval. He carefully placed the dog in his specially designed carrier, a clear bag that would allow Little Red to be seen while keeping him safe and comfortable during the concert. Daniel had spent days researching the Opry's pet policy, calling anonymously to confirm that service animals were allowed, though he knew Little Red didn't technically qualify. He was prepared to argue, to plead, to do whatever it took to bring his four-legged tribute artist to see the real thing. The drive to the Opry felt like a journey through time. Daniel passed landmarks that held memories of his life with Sarah, the coffee shop where they'd had their first date, the park where he'd proposed, the hospital where she'd taken her last breath. But today, those memories didn't crush him with their weight. Instead, they felt like gentle reminders of love, of the happiness that was possible in life, of the reasons worth living for. At the Opry box office, Daniel's worst fears materialized when the teenage ticket agent looked skeptically at Little Red's carrier. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we don't allow pets in the venue unless they're registered service animals." Daniel's heart sank. But before he could respond, an older woman behind him in line stepped forward. She was elegantly dressed with silver hair styled in perfect waves, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. Excuse me, young man, she said to the ticket agent, her voice carrying the authority of a true Southern matriarch. That's not just any pet. That's the famous Little Red, the dog that's been all over the internet. Surely you've seen the photos. She turned to Daniel with a conspiratorial wink. I'm Margaret Patterson, by the way. I've been following your wonderful work online. Daniel blinked in surprise. You... You know about Little Red? Honey, half of Nashville knows about Little Red, Margaret laughed. My granddaughter showed me the photos weeks ago, and I've been hoping to meet y'all ever since. That dog is more famous than half the performers who've graced this stage. The ticket agent looked uncertain, glancing between Daniel's earnest face and Margaret's commanding presence. Finally, Margaret leaned forward and lowered her voice. Between you and me, I happen to know that Miss Reba herself has been hoping this young man would show up tonight. It would be a real shame if he couldn't get in because of some technicality, don't you think? Within minutes, Daniel found himself inside the legendary Grand Ole Opry House, still unsure how Margaret's intervention had worked, but grateful beyond words. His seats were in the upper balcony, the cheapest tickets available, but as he settled into his chair with Little Red on his lap, he felt like he had the best seats in the house. The venue filled quickly with an energy that Daniel had forgotten existed. Families laughed together, couples held hands, groups of friends sang along to the pre-show music. For 2 years, Daniel had avoided crowds, avoided places where happiness felt expected and natural. But tonight, surrounded by Reba's fans, he felt like he belonged somewhere again. As the lights dimmed and the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, Daniel's hands began to shake with anticipation. Little Red seemed to sense the excitement, sitting up straighter in his miniature red dress and looking toward the stage, as if he understood the magnitude of the moment. When Reba finally appeared, walking onto the stage in a shimmering gold gown that caught the spotlights like liquid fire, Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. After decades of listening to her voice through speakers and watching her on television, seeing her in person felt surreal. She was smaller than he'd imagined, but commanded the stage with a presence that filled every corner of the massive venue. She opened with "Turn on the Radio," and Daniel found himself singing along for the first time in months, his voice joining thousands of others in perfect harmony. Little Red remained perfectly still, as if he too was mesmerized by the performance. With each song, Daniel felt layers of grief and isolation beginning to peel away, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed: pure joy. Reba moved through her catalogue with the skill of a master storyteller, weaving together songs that chronicled love, loss, heartbreak, and redemption. When she performed "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," Daniel's eyes filled with tears. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for the woman on stage who had given him a language for his pain, who had shown him that heartbreak could be transformed into something beautiful. It was during Fancy that everything changed. Reba had reached the climactic moment of the song, belting out the lyrics about a girl who refused to let poverty and circumstance define her destiny, when her eyes swept across the crowd and landed on something that made her stop mid-verse. The music continued, but Reba stood frozen at center stage, staring up into the balcony where a small red figure was clearly visible even from that distance. Daniel, completely absorbed in the performance, was holding Little Red up so the dog could see better, unaware that they had become the focus of 20,000 pairs of eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," Reba said into her microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence as the band stopped playing. "Is that who I think it is up there in the balcony?" Daniel felt his blood turn to ice as a spotlight suddenly illuminated him and Little Red. The entire venue erupted in whispers and pointing fingers as people tried to see what had captured Reba's attention. Daniel wanted nothing more than to disappear, to melt into his seat and become invisible, but there was nowhere to hide. "Folks, I need to tell y'all something," Reba continued, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "A few weeks ago I saw some photos online that absolutely took my breath away. Someone out there had created the most beautiful tribute I've ever seen, turning their little dog into a perfect miniature version of me. I've been hoping and praying that whoever was behind that incredible artistry would show up at one of my shows." The crowd began to cheer and applaud as they realized what was happening. Daniel sat paralyzed, Little Red still in his arms, both of them caught in the bright spotlight like deer in headlights. "Sir, would you mind standing up so everyone can see that beautiful work of art you've got there?" Reba asked, shading her eyes with her hand as she tried to get a better look at them. On shaking legs, Daniel stood, holding Little Red carefully so the audience could see the dog's elaborate costume. The venue exploded in applause and cheers, and Daniel could hear people around him whispering excitedly about the photos they'd seen online, about how incredible the real thing looked in person. "That is absolutely magnificent," Reba said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "The attention to detail, the love that went into that creation, it's more beautiful than anything I've ever worn on this stage. Would you and your talented friend there like to come down and join me?" Daniel's mind went completely blank. This couldn't be happening. Reba Mcentire, his lifelong idol, was inviting him onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in front of 20,000 people. His legs felt like they might give out entirely. I can't," he managed to say, though his voice was barely audible even with the microphone picking up sounds from the audience. "Oh, but you can," Reba insisted, her voice taking on the gentle but firm tone of a mother, encouraging a shy child. "Security, could you please help this gentleman and his beautiful companion make their way down here? I think Nashville needs to meet the artist behind this incredible tribute." As security personnel began making their way toward Daniel's section, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Margaret, the woman who had helped him get into the venue. "This is your moment, honey," she whispered. "Don't let fear rob you of something this magical. Your wife would want you to take this step." The mention of Sarah gave Daniel the strength he needed. Sarah had always pushed him to be braver, to take chances, to believe in himself when he couldn't believe in anything else. Clutching Little Red to his chest, Daniel followed the security guard down the narrow stairs of the Opry House, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone in the venue could hear it. As they made their way toward the stage, the audience erupted in sustained applause, thousands of people on their feet, cheering for a man and his dog who had captured their hearts without even trying. Daniel had never felt so terrified and so alive at the same time, walking toward a moment that would change everything he thought he knew about his life and his future. The walk to the stage felt like it lasted both an eternity and a single heartbeat. Daniel's legs moved automatically, guided by the security guard who kept reassuring him with gentle words that barely registered through the roar of blood in his ears. 20,000 people were on their feet, applauding and cheering, but all Daniel could focus on was the woman in the shimmering gold gown waiting for him at center stage, her famous smile radiant under the bright lights. As he reached the bottom of the stage, a stagehand appeared with a small set of steps, and suddenly Daniel found himself climbing toward the most famous stage in country music history. Little Red remained perfectly calm in his arms, as if the dog understood the magnitude of the moment and was determined not to let his nerves show. The roar of the crowd grew deafening as Daniel's feet touched the legendary wooden planks where countless country music legends had performed. Reba Mcentire stood just 10 feet away from him, and Daniel felt his knees go weak. Up close, she was even more beautiful than he'd imagined, her presence commanding and warm at the same time. Her famous red hair caught the stage lights like fire, and her eyes held a kindness that immediately put him at ease. "Well, hello there," Reba said, walking toward him with open arms. "I am so honored to finally meet you, and this must be the famous Little Red." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was standing on the Grand Ole Opry stage, talking to Reba Mcentire, holding his dog, who was dressed like a miniature version of his idol. The surreal nature of the moment overwhelmed every rational thought in his head. Reba seemed to understand his speechlessness and gently placed her hand on his arm. "Honey, it's okay. I know this is overwhelming. Why don't you tell everyone your name?" "Daniel," he managed to whisper, then cleared his throat and tried again. "Daniel Harmon, and this is Little Red." The crowd cheered at the introduction, and Reba knelt down in her elegant gown to get a closer look at Little Red. The dog, seeming to sense he was the star of the moment, sat up straighter and actually appeared to pose for the thousands of onlookers. "Oh my goodness," Reba breathed, studying the intricate details of Little Red's costume. "Daniel, this is absolutely incredible. The workmanship, the attention to detail. This dress is more beautiful than the original I wore. How long did this take you to make?" "About "About 2 weeks," Daniel stammered, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his craft. "I hand-sewed every sequin. The pattern, I had to create it from scratch by studying photos and videos of your performances." Reba stood up, shaking her head in amazement. "2 weeks? Daniel, I have costume designers with entire teams who couldn't create something this perfect. This is pure artistry." She turned to address the audience. Folks, what you're seeing here is someone who turned grief into beauty, pain into purpose. This isn't just a costume. This is love made visible. Daniel's eyes filled with tears at her words. Somehow, this woman he'd never met had understood exactly what Little Red represented to him, had seen through to the heart of why he'd started this journey. Can you tell us a little about what inspired this incredible tribute? Reba asked gently, holding the microphone toward him. Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, all focused on him with genuine interest and warmth. 2 years ago, he couldn't have imagined standing in front of even 5 people, let alone 20,000. But something about Reba's presence, about the way she'd welcomed him onto her stage, gave him courage he didn't know he possessed. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the venue's sound system. "Sarah. She died of cancer, and I didn't know how to keep living without her." The audience grew completely silent, hanging on every word. "Your music got me through some very dark times, Miss Mcentire. When I couldn't find words for what I was feeling, your song said it all for me." Reba's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she nodded encouragingly for him to continue. "Little Red here, he's been my companion through the worst of it. And one night when I was feeling particularly lost, I looked at him and saw something that reminded me of you. His red hair, his personality. So I started creating these costumes as a way to, I don't know, honor the music that saved my life, I guess. It gave me something to focus on besides the pain." The crowd was completely silent, except for the occasional sniffle from audience members who were clearly moved by Daniel's story. Reba wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Daniel, I have to tell you something," Reba said, her voice thick with emotion. "In 40-plus years of performing, I've received thousands of tributes and honors, but I have never, and I mean never, been more touched or more honored than I am right now, standing here with you and Little Red. What you've created isn't just beautiful. It's a testament to the healing power of music and love." She paused, looking out at the audience, then back at Daniel. "You know what? I was supposed to sing The Greatest Man I Never Knew next, but I think tonight calls for something different. Daniel, would you and Little Red like to help me sing I'm a Survivor?" Daniel's eyes widened in shock. I couldn't. I'm not a singer. I'm just a high school music teacher." "Honey, you are a survivor," Reba said firmly, "and sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that come from the heart, not from training." Besides, I have a feeling you know every word to this song." She was right. "I'm a Survivor" had been the song that had gotten Daniel through the first anniversary of Sarah's death, the lyrics about enduring hardship and coming out stronger resonating deeply with his journey. He did know every word. The band began the opening notes, and Reba started singing the first verse, her powerful voice filling the venue with a message of resilience and hope. When she reached the chorus, she held the microphone between them, and Daniel found his voice joining hers. "I'm a survivor. I'm not going to give up," they sang together, Daniel's rough, emotion-filled voice blending surprisingly well with Reba's polished tones. Little Red seemed to sense the importance of the moment, sitting perfectly still in Daniel's arms like a furry, sequined statue. As they reached the final chorus, something magical happened. The entire audience began singing along, 20,000 voices joining together in a celebration of survival, of overcoming adversity, of finding light in the darkest moments. Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, rich and poor, all united in this moment of shared humanity, and felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel felt truly alive, not just existing, not just surviving, but genuinely, completely alive. The music, the crowd, Reba's presence beside him, Little Red's warm weight in his arms, it all combined into a moment of pure joy that he thought he'd never experience again. As the song ended, the audience erupted in the loudest applause Daniel had ever heard. People were on their feet, many wiping away tears, all celebrating not just the performance, but the raw emotion and authenticity they'd just witnessed. Reba turned to Daniel and wrapped him in a hug that felt like coming home. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this. Thank you for showing me what music can really do." When they separated, Reba addressed the audience one more time. "Folks, I want you to remember this night. Remember Daniel and Little Red. Remember that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain, and that healing is always possible when we open our hearts to love and music and each other." The crowd gave them another standing ovation, and Daniel felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and acceptance from complete strangers. As security prepared to escort him back to his seat so Reba could continue her concert, she caught his arm. "Daniel, I'm not done with you yet," she said with a mischievous smile. "After the show, I'd love for you to meet me backstage. There's something I want to discuss with you, something that might just change your life in the best possible way." As Daniel made his way back through the audience, still carrying Little Red and still processing what had just happened, he had no idea that Reba Mcentire was about to offer him an opportunity that would not only transform his own life, but would eventually touch the hearts of millions of people across the country. The night that had started as a simple tribute to his musical hero was about to become the beginning of a journey that would prove that sometimes, when we least expect it, the universe conspires to give us exactly what we need to heal. The remainder of Reba's concert passed in a blur for Daniel. He sat in his balcony seat, Little Red still perfectly groomed in his miniature red dress, while people around him whispered excitedly and asked for photos. Daniel felt like he was floating outside his own body, unable to fully process what had just occurred on stage. Complete strangers approached him during intermission, sharing their own stories of loss and how music had helped them heal, creating an impromptu support group in the upper balcony of the Grand Ole Opry. When the concert finally ended and the last encore had been performed, a security guard appeared at Daniel's row. "Mr. Harmon, Miss Mcentire is ready to see you backstage now." Daniel's hands began trembling again as he followed the guard through corridors he'd only dreamed of walking through. The backstage area of the Opry was filled with history. Photographs of country music legends lined the walls, and Daniel could almost feel the presence of all the great performers who had passed through these halls. Little Red seemed equally impressed, his head swiveling to take in all the sights and sounds of the famous venue. They stopped outside a dressing room door marked with a simple star and Reba's name. The security guard knocked gently, and Reba's voice called out, "Come in!" Daniel stepped into the room and was immediately struck by how normal it felt. Despite being one of the most famous performers in country music history, Reba's dressing room was warm and welcoming, filled with flowers from fans and personal photographs that made it feel like a home away from home. Reba had changed out of her stage gown and was now wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her famous red hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Somehow she looked even more beautiful without all the stage makeup and elaborate costumes. She smiled when she saw Daniel and Little Red, gesturing for them to sit on a comfortable couch while she settled into a chair across from them. "First things first," Reba said, reaching into a small refrigerator and pulling out a bottle of water. You need to hydrate after all that excitement, and I bet Little Red could use some water too. She produced a small bowl and filled it, setting it on the floor, where Little Red immediately began drinking gratefully. I still can't believe this is real, Daniel said, accepting the water bottle with shaking hands. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back in my apartment and realize this was all just a dream. Reba laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. Oh, honey, it's very real. And I'm so glad it happened. You know, in all my years performing, I've never had a moment quite like that. The way you shared your story, the way the audience connected with you, that was pure magic. She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. Daniel, I want to talk to you about something important. What happened out there tonight that wasn't just a feel-good moment, that was something much bigger. You have a gift, not just for creating beautiful costumes, but for touching people's hearts, for helping them feel less alone in their struggles. Daniel shook his head. I'm not anyone special, Miss Mcentire. I'm just a guy who lost his wife and found a way to cope. Call me Reba, please, and you're wrong about not being special. She stood up and began pacing the small room, her energy building as she spoke. Daniel, I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've seen every kind of tribute, every kind of fan expression you can imagine. But what you've created with Little Red, what you shared on that stage tonight, that comes from a place of pure authenticity, that's incredibly rare. She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I first saw the photos of Little Red. I want to offer you something that I think could change both of our lives. Daniel's heart began racing. What do you mean? Reba sat back down, her eyes bright with excitement. I'm planning a special tour for next year. Not my usual concert tour, but something different. Something focused on healing, on the power of music to help people through their darkest moments. I want to call it the Survivor Tour, and I want you and Little Red to be part of it. Daniel blinked, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? I want you to travel with me, Daniel. I want you to share your story in every city we visit. There are millions of people out there who are struggling with loss, with grief, with feeling like they'll never be whole again. Your story, your journey with Little Red, the way you've transformed pain into beauty, that's exactly what people need to hear. The room fell silent except for the sound of Little Red's gentle breathing as he napped on the couch. Daniel stared at Reba, his mind struggling to process what she was proposing. I I couldn't, he finally managed. I'm not a performer. I can barely speak in front of my high school classes without getting nervous. You weren't nervous tonight, Reba pointed out gently. When you were talking about Sarah, about Little Red, about your journey, you were the most natural, authentic speaker I've ever shared a stage with. People connected with you because you were real, because you were vulnerable, because you showed them that it's possible to survive the worst things life can throw at us. She reached over and placed her hand on his. Daniel, I'm not asking you to become a country music star. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, a man who found a way to keep living after losing everything, who turned his love for music and his creativity into a path forward. There are so many people who need to hear that message. Daniel looked down at Little Red, who had woken up and was watching the conversation with those intelligent amber eyes. The dog seemed to sense the importance of the moment, sitting up straighter in his miniature dress. What would I have to do? Daniel asked quietly. Reba's face lit up with excitement. We'd visit 20 cities over 6 months. In each city, you'd share your story, maybe 15 or 20 minutes before I perform. You talk about grief, about healing, about how music and love can carry us through the impossible. Little Red would be there with you, of course, wearing his beautiful costumes that you've created. She paused, letting the magnitude of her offer sink in. Daniel, this isn't just about performing. This is about helping people. Every night, there would be hundreds or thousands of people in the audience who are fighting their own battles with loss, with depression, with feeling like they can't go on. Your story could be the thing that helps them take one more step, that shows them there's still beauty and purpose to be found even after devastating loss. Daniel felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. The idea that his private journey with grief could somehow help others felt both terrifying and deeply meaningful. There's more, Reba continued. I want to use this tour to raise awareness and funds for grief counseling programs across the country, mental health resources, support groups for people dealing with loss, places where people can find the help they need to heal. A portion of every ticket sold would go toward establishing these programs in communities that need them most. You really think people would want to hear from me? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, did you see the reaction tonight? 20,000 people were hanging on every word you said. When you sang with me, when you shared your story, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. People don't just want to hear from you. They need to hear from you. Daniel closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah, of what she would say if she were here. He could almost hear her voice encouraging him to be brave, to take the chance, to believe in himself the way she'd always believed in him. What about my job, my students? The tour would run during summer break, Reba said. You could keep teaching, but you'd also have this incredible opportunity to reach people on a much larger scale. Think about it. Instead of teaching music to 30 kids a day, you'd be teaching life lessons to thousands of people who desperately need to hear them. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at Reba, seeing the sincerity and hope in her expression. Then he looked down at Little Red, who seemed to nod his tiny head as if giving his approval. When would this start? Daniel asked. Next summer. That gives us almost a year to plan everything, to work on your presentation, to create new costumes for Little Red if you want. We could start with smaller venues, help you get comfortable with speaking to larger audiences. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside his chest. For 2 years, he'd been focused on surviving, on just getting through each day. But what Reba was offering wasn't just survival, it was purpose, meaning, a way to transform his grief into something that could help others. I have one condition, Daniel said finally. Reba raised her eyebrows. What's that? I want to visit schools too. Kids who've lost parents, teenagers dealing with depression. They need to know that it's possible to find hope again. If we're going to do this, I want it to reach everyone who needs it, not just adults who can afford concert tickets. Reba's smile was radiant. Daniel Harmon, you continue to amaze me. Yes, absolutely. We'll include school visits, hospital visits, anywhere people need to hear your message. 6 months later, Daniel stood on a stage in Atlanta, looking out at an audience of 5,000 people, Little Red in his arms wearing a brand new costume inspired by Reba's latest album. As he began to share his story, Sarah's death, his dark period of grief, finding purpose through Little Red's transformations, he saw tears in the eyes of audience members who recognized their own pain in his words. After his presentation, as Reba took the stage and the crowd erupted in applause, Daniel remained in the wings watching the magic happen. A woman approached him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I lost my husband last year, and I've been thinking about..." about giving up. But hearing your story tonight, seeing how you found a way forward, you've given me hope that maybe I can too." Daniel hugged the woman, little Red between them like a furry ambassador of comfort, and realized that this was what Sarah would have wanted for him. Not just to survive his grief, but to transform it into something beautiful, something that could light the way for others walking through their own darkness. As Reba's voice filled the arena with songs of hope and resilience, Daniel smiled, knowing that he'd finally found his way back to living, not just for himself, but for everyone who needed to believe that after the darkest night, the sun would rise again. The man who had once thought his story was ending had discovered that it was really just beginning, and the best chapters were still to be written.